Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Outreach Director. Today's episode is being brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas. Today, we're bringing you the third in a series of special editions of Weekly Witness with audio from Faith and Democracy, Lifting Houston Faith Voices for Justice. Today's episode features the voting panel. Now, y'all, the goal of this panel is not just for informational purposes or your entertainment value. We hope that you will work with your congregation to promote safe, fair elections this voting season. So check out the episode, share it with your networks, and let us know what you think. And let us know what you plan on doing with this information. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Hello, friends. My name is Scott Atnip, Texas Impact's Outreach Director, and I want to welcome you to the third session of Texas Impact's Faith and Democracy, Lifting Houston Voices for Justice. This session will focus on voting and how you and your congregation can work to ensure safe, fair elections in 2020. I'm going to introduce the panel in just a minute, but first I'll offer a bit of background and some logistics for this panel today. Today's event has 4 sessions, and you're welcome to attend as many as you want, which at this point means you can join the Texas Impact team for our 5:15 panel. This is the third in a series of conversations Texas Impact is hosting throughout the state this summer and fall. For those unfamiliar with Texas Impact, we're the state's oldest and largest interfaith network. We're a membership organization, and if today's event inspires you to become more involved, we hope that you'll consider joining. You can click the link in the chat to join or find out more information. Texas Impact exists to put faith into action. We equip Texas faith leaders and their congregations with the information, opportunities, and outreach tools to educate your communities and engage with lawmakers on pressing public policy issues. We help people live out their faith in the public square, moving the faith community from charity to justice. Communities of faith have a heritage of service. We engage in direct acts of compassion toward the most vulnerable members of our community. And while we recognize our calling to be the hands and feet that serve our neighbors, we also believe that collectively we can make a broader impact by changing public policy. And that's where Texas Impact steps in. This fall, we're especially prioritizing our Texas Faith Votes campaign, which you can find on our Texas Impact on our website at texasimpact.org or momentarily in the chat. This campaign has tools for you and your congregation to promote safe and accountable voting, including 4 different components. First, a checklist for those wanting to ensure a safe, fair election. Second, a pledge to vote based on our shared faith values of climate, health, immigration, and a rejection of discrimination. Third, a challenge to recruit election workers. And fourth, tools to equip people to vote by mail. Again, a link will be posted in the chat, and I haven't talked to the panel about this, but my guess is that they won't mind if you take just a moment to go ahead and sign up for those tools while we speak. I also wanted to take a second to thank our Faith and Democracy Houston co-sponsors. I went through the full list during the first panel, but you can find those on our registration page. And finally, I want to describe the technology for today. You should see at the bottom of your screen a chat and a Q&A feature. We're going to treat the chat as a place to have water cooler type talk. There will be Texas Impact staff in the chat answering questions and engaging in conversation. But if you have questions specifically for the panelists, please put those in the Q&A section, and we'll get to those if we have time at the end of the conversation. You can also email me at scott@texasimpact.org if you have questions after we finish today, and I or a member of the Texas Impact staff will respond to you sometime this next week. Y'all, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So with that, I'll go ahead and encourage y'all, if you have favorite quotes or challenges, to go ahead and share those on social media. Share this content either from our Facebook page, YouTube channel later in this week, or keep an eye on our Weekly Witness podcast feed. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel for today. First, we have Dr. Robert Stein, who's the faculty director, did I get that right, Dr. Stein, with the Center for Civic Leadership at Rice University. Dr. Stein, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We also have with us Raven Douglas, political director with Move Texas. Raven, thanks for the time today.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, my friend and colleague, Texas Impact's advocacy director, Josh Houston. Josh, thanks for the time.
You bet. Pleasure being here.
It's always nice being able to talk to you on the weekends as well as during the week. So, Dr. Stein, we'll go ahead and start with you. Houston is a large, diverse community preparing for an election during a global pandemic, which has its own challenges, right? So, as someone who is a leading expert in elections and civic life, could you talk to us about how Harris County is preparing and whether there's anything that we should be watching?
Sure, I'll try to do this quickly. The background for this is that my colleagues and I were invited by the county clerk here in Harris County to assist then her and now him, Chris Collins, to approach the COVID-19 epidemic and elections. As many of you already know, the county clerk instituted in 2019 election day vote centers that lets you vote anywhere you want on election day. We had that privilege or right if you want before election day. In addition, the clerk has established a whole bunch of what we call safe techniques for voting, both for poll workers and for, of course, voters. And these include everything from PPE, personal protective equipment, fingertip coverings, encouraging people to wear face masks so that it is not something you can require, social distancing, and most importantly, we work with him since even before the election in identifying what now might be as many as 120 to 150 early in-person voting locations. And of course, the challenge of mail-in voting during a lot of litigation. Many have heard about this. We still don't know what the final decision will be on whether or not the clerk can mail out applications for mail-in voting. But quickly, let me tell you what the voters have told us. Both in April and May, and again in August, we interviewed each time close to 7,000 voters in Harris County. This is not a small sample, 7,000 voters. So what I'm about to tell you has big samples for people of color, young people, old people, people who are disabled, people who have concerns about COVID-19 because of underlying health concerns. Most importantly, we did a lot of survey work with voters who voted in July in the primary runoff election. And these are the kinds of voters that turn out for lots of races. And if you can make these voters happy, or if you cannot make these voters happy in terms of safe, you have some real concerns in November. Harris County's done what I would consider to be a stellar job. Not only were 26% of voters who told us in the survey afraid to vote, but many of those who did not want to vote in the runoff election did so when they were aware of the fact that the clerk had provided ample security and safety, not only for the voters, but for the poll workers. And in fact, this was the highest turnout election for primary runoff we've seen in 20 years. And this one was, of course, postponed. But what's most important is this. One, the voters felt social distancing, PPE, face masks. But the most important thing to the voter was that the poll worker have PPE, the poll worker be protected, not necessarily from people who they come into contact with, as we might expect, but poll workers are men and women who are invariably over 65, most susceptible to this. And because they come into contact with hundreds of people, not only are they susceptible to contracting the virus, but most importantly, they can also disseminate that virus. So a lot of voters told us this was very important to them. Two, what I was stunned at was that even though there was a large proportion of people who told us they were concerned come November about voting, 80% on average told us they were voting in this election. I don't think that should surprise us, but what did also surprise me is that people of color, African American, Hispanic, Asians, young people, were even more likely to vote because of the things that the county clerk had done. Their rate of reported voting was at 90%. And if that might sound like cheap talk, a substantial portion of those people that we talked to of color, younger, individuals who reported a disability or knew somebody that had COVID-19 and God forbid had died from it, those are the people who were even more likely to vote. They were not going to stop. If there is some bad news, and I have to say this because I think it's really important, I've worked with several churches and synagogues, most recently Emmanuel, in helping them identify their voters who are susceptible to the COVID-19 virus and need to find ways in which they can protect themselves, obviously mail-in voting. Most of our voters do not know how to return a mail ballot. And this is really important. Now, this poll finished at the end of August, so we've had about 2 weeks And even then, the clerk has been doing exceptional outreach and, of course, the legal battles of sending everybody an application form, not a ballot. But I think we'll have to do much better at informing people that they cannot return their ballots to a polling location, which seems reasonable, but nonetheless is illegal in Texas. There will be other ways to return your ballot besides the mail, and that will be drop-off locations and, of course, at the county courthouses. Two other things. We are monitoring this really carefully. We go back into the field, right? Help me here. Today's in 1 week. And we will continue to survey. We'll probably do about 15,000 interviews, because what we want to be able to tell the clerk, we think that about a third of the vote will be done by mail. We think about 60 to 70% of the vote will be cast in person before Election Day, leaving Election Day for if it's 20%, it'll be a lot. But what's real important for voters is that they be aware of the fact that they will have lots of options, and the clerk will be advertising his website or his website. And it'll be really important that voters monitor that website so they can find the day, the time, and the location where they can vote and keep the viral load down. Remember, there'll be 16 days of early voting, 8 hours a day, including several locations that will have 24-hour voting as well as drive-through. So I'm proud to say I live in Harris County, but I've been working with several clerks. I can tell you that Harris County is probably among the top urban diverse populations where it makes it really, really hard to turn out voters, because residential mobility has done what I would think is historically a stellar job. I know the clerk has had some difficulties before, but this effort, I think, really represents what the county both deserves, and I think it'll prove effective in terms of turnout.
So props to Harris County, and thank you for that information. It's really helpful to know how excited people are to vote in this election. And Raven, we'll move to you. But one of the things that has to happen in order for people to take that energy and actually vote is that they have to be registered, right? And so Move Texas is focused on registering and mobilizing, especially young voters. How's that going? Is it more challenging during a pandemic, and how can listeners help?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. It's definitely pre-COVID. We work directly with young people to increase youth voter access, voter turnout, and all of that work. But the way that our work prior to COVID has been powered has all been face-to-face. You know, we're in youth communities every day. They see us as trusted partners. Texas does not have online voter registration. So we have registered over 100,000 young people since 2013, which our organization was founded. But all of that has been done by hand, in person. And so when COVID happened, we had to completely revolutionize the way that we did our work. And so as we all know, you know, COVID didn't only impact our health and our economy, but it's also impacted our democracy. And so with everything that's happening with COVID, we know that getting registered to vote and voting isn't impossible. It just may take a few extra steps, and we're helping to kind of facilitate all of that along the way. But some of the work that we've been doing in the past couple of months, one, we shifted to doing a very large voter registration by mail campaign. We've mailed over 400,000 voter registration applications to young people all across the state. And we also pay for the postage for those voter registration applications, because we know, right now, if you want to get registered to vote, you have to go through the Secretary of State's website. And we know that not everyone has access to a computer, to the internet, or even to a printer. I'm a 24-year-old and I don't have a printer. And so we want to make sure that we are kind of breaking down those barriers, even if it's as small as, paying for that postage, to ensure that people can get registered to vote. And on top of that, we wanted to continue to do kind of that engagement, even if it's over phone or over text message. And so we've committed to calling every single one of those potential voters, because we know that we can increase the return rate on those voter registration applications by 20 or 30% by just doing a simple follow-up call. And we don't even have to talk to the voter. If we just leave a message, we know that that connection can help increase the likelihood of them getting that application. And so working with a number of our paid canvassers and volunteers, we've called over 150,000 people in only 2 weeks. And we've already had 5,000 people resubmit their application. And so we're hoping that we can continue to get thousands and thousands of more prior to the October 5th voter registration deadline. But another piece of our work is, what we say at Move is that we want to build voting into the culture of youth communities. So it should be, prior to COVID, we would show up to the movie theater and do voter registration, or we'd be at a concert or a football game. And so now, what we're seeing a lot is that a lot of people are on social media all day because there's really nothing else for us to do these days. And so we did a 6-week series we called it the Texas Artist, Texas Voter series, where we highlighted a number of artists, both big and small across the state, and engage people through music and culture, but also through voter registration. And so, in between their sets, we're talking about why is it important to vote and when is the voter registration deadline, and then driving them to our website. If you go to movetexas.org/register, you can complete the form there. We'll mail the form to you. Again, pay for that postage to send it back. And a third thing that we're really excited about that's coming up is National Voter Registration Day. It's on Tuesday, September 22nd. And in the past 3 years, MOVE has held the largest in-person National Voter Registration Day event in the country. In 2018, we registered over 5,300 people in 10 hours. In 2019, we registered over 3,600 people. And so this year, we're doing what we call a reverse telethon, where you don't call us, we call you. And we're committing to calling over 100,000 people that day to tell them about registering to vote, getting them the access and information they need to get registered, and hopefully continuing to do that outreach and engagement. And so those are kind of some of the things that we've been doing throughout this period of time. And I think this really taught us how to continue to innovate. But if you want to get involved with the work that we're doing, we're calling voters every single day. So if you go to movetexas.org/volunteer, you can sign up for a shift there. Again, they happen every day except for Sunday. And you can find a good time that works for you, because we all know that it doesn't, we need all the help that we can get to continue to increase voter access, especially in youth communities.
I relate to a lot of what you said. I am finding myself on social media all day, and my wife texted a little while ago because she's picking up a printer because my daughter's in school at home and we don't have one in our house either. But we will tomorrow. So Josh, Texas Impact has been focused on providing safe and fair elections, and especially prioritizing the health and well-being of vulnerable voters. How can listeners participate in that work?
Yeah, so I'm really kind of worried about the working mom that's out there who has kids and a job. For her to be able to squeeze in voting between shifts or for childcare pickup, she really needs the line to be less than 20 minutes. That, I think, is our goal, 20 minutes to be in and out of the polls. So she actually needs your help to make sure that the wait to vote is less than 20 minutes. Otherwise, she's very likely to be disenfranchised. And on top of that, I'm worried about our faith communities, because no matter how November 3rd turns out, there's going to be people who feel it was unfair or it was rigged in some way. So to every clergy person that I get screen time with these days, I say, congrats, you're going to have to minister to that situation. But here's the good news. The solution to these problems are bread and butter. The best way to defend democracy is to double down on your commitment to its institutions. And no institution is more fundamental than election administration. So here's what you're going to do. If my number one worry is that disenfranchised mom, then the number one thing we need is enough poll workers. Because the bottom line is the majority of voters in Texas are going to have to go in person. And the average age of that poll worker, at least in, I think, Bexar County, and I doubt it's different anywhere else, is 72 years old. So counties are very worried about shortages. And if polls do not have election judges, they cannot open. And a polling location shortage means you're going to have disenfranchised voters. My number two big concern, but number two solution, I should say, if you can't do a 16-hour day as an election judge, and it's a very long day for any reason, be a poll monitor, especially if you can travel around the state. Through the Election Protection Coalition, we're one of 31 nonprofits that are involved in that coalition. We're recruiting poll monitors. Poll monitors are the eyes and ears of the election protection lawyers that work the hotline and work the command center and stand by to rush to the courthouse if there's some sort of problem at a polling location. So there are three kinds that we're going to have this go around. We're going to have people stationed in person, of course, well beyond the at the electioneering line, so many feet from the polling location where it's permissible. They'll be stationed there at known locations where there's ever been problems in the past. We're going to have a second kind called roving monitors, where they're going to be in a car and they will bounce between different locations just to check in on different locations to make sure how long the lines are. And then we're going to have monitors online that are watching from your home, Twitter, and other social media for complaints about problem locations that may be occurring. And the third thing you're going to do is you're going to make sure that everybody who is 65 plus is voting by mail and voting by mail early, early being the key. Tripling the number of voters that vote by mail is a win. That shortens the lines on election day for the people who do have to go to the polls. It is safe if you do not push the deadlines. And so Texas Impact would recommend, this is not the legal deadline, this is a recommendation. Our advice is to apply to vote by mail before September 21st. The reason for that early date is because the counties will do the first big mail out of ballots 30 to 38 days before Election Day. And you want to be a part of that very initial mail out. Say it takes a week to get to you in a slowdown. That still gives you 3 weeks to get that mail-in ballot in. Do not procrastinate. If you stay away from legal deadlines, then the Postal Service issues should be irrelevant. And lastly, you're not going to get overwhelmed by the national situation. You cannot speak for 10,000 polling locations in Texas, much less 49 other states. Don't try, it's too big. You can enlist to serve your county, and you can speak to what you saw in your community. And that is super important to be able to respond to somebody who may have some sort of half-informed opinion, to be able to actually know how it works, to have the credibility to be able to overcome that doubt. Texas Impact is here to help you. We have a publication on how to vote by mail. It has I've yet to see a question that it hasn't answered, but I'm sure there is one. I'm going to post these links in the chat box right now. And let me say that everything that I'm going to say is the link to is in the chat box. I say that as it's not going in the chat box. Okay, that's my notes to myself, so I'll get that fixed here in a second at the end. The second big thing you're going to do, be sure to check your registration. And that link is coming right now. I don't know why that's taking a while. But anyway, here are the 4 links that I'm talking about. Be sure you check your registration. As a staff, all of us worked the polls, and we saw a number of people in the last cycle who were marked inactive for reasons we don't understand. It was an unusually high number, and it could just be anecdotal from this one location. But make sure you check your registration, even if you know you are registered. I want you to check it right now, just to make sure that nothing has gone weird at the voting on the rolls. We had an incident in the last legislative session where there was a purge, and it led to a Secretary of State not getting confirmed. Let's just make sure that's not happening to you. And then third, the election judges are the priority. But if you can't do that for any number of reasons, then poll monitoring is equally important so that we can have eyes and ears to know what's going on Election Day.
All right. Thanks, Josh, and thanks for sharing your notes with us. I am going to ask this next question to all 3 of you because as the outreach director for Texas Impact, I get calls almost every day from clergy or faith leaders talking or asking how they can help protect democracy during this time. So I wonder if y'all can just share what strategies those faith leaders or their congregations can implement to ensure safe, fair elections, and have you seen examples of congregations who are doing it well? Dr. Stein, we'll start with you. And you're muted.
Particularly Jewish congregations who've been concerned about their older voters. They're concerned about not only them voting safely by mail, but I'll say this quickly because I think Josh touched on it. The most important thing about elections In fact, I would go so far as to say elections are conducted for losers. Think about that. Losers, not the way you think I mean it. Those who lose an election have to believe the election was fair, that their vote was counted as they intended it, and that they will therefore come back and contest again. They have to believe that. Democracies fail when people don't believe, like in Belarus, that the election was fair. And when our political climate, and sadly our political leaders, have inspired us to believe, is that whoever loses this election, it will not be fair. If there's one thing I would hope faith leaders could instill in people, win or lose, these elections are in fact fair, in spite of the efforts of others to undermine people's confidence. Everything I've seen, and I've been working for 20 years with hundreds of state and county election officials. And these are men and women who are committed. If I can, my wife's birthday's tonight, so I'm going to have to leave it by 5. Otherwise, my grandchildren will kill me. But something that I think Raven should be very proud of. Efforts to register new voters have been spectacular, not just during COVID, which is obviously difficult, but before. And here's evidence of it. Remember, we interviewed in August just under 7,000 people. One of the things we did for the clerk was to recruit poll workers. As you know, we need 12,000 poll workers to work these 100 and possibly 50 and 700 election day. And as Josh pointed out, many of the people who have worked the polls before simply will not and cannot because of age and health. Here's what's spectacular. We asked people at the end of the survey, if you're interested, we told them, we gave a pitch. You can make quite a bit of money working the polls, up to $3,000 if you work all early and election day options. What was amazing was that the overwhelming majority of people who at the end of the survey were told they could hit a button going to the clerk's website and sign up for the training, 627, 425 of them were women under the age of 45 who had voted in their first primary election in March or July. And of those, the modal number were Latinx. Wow. If you want evidence of the excitement of this election, I know that we all seem to think that criticism of election officials, mail-in voting, the charges, but I'll offer the argument that this is just mobilizing people to understand how really important it is. But faith leaders need to instill, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they've got to instill in people the belief that this is an election that will be, by election official standards, conducted fairly. And I doubt very much anyone's going to be able to overturn this election, however much they attempt.
Appreciate it. Raven, anything to add?
Yeah, I think Dr. Stein covered it really well. But one sentiment that I'll just echo right now, I think one of the most critical things that faith leaders can do right now is educate voters. I think voter education is super critical. One, because I think there is a lot of misinformation, particularly around vote by mail. But I think also, two, there's just so much that's changing. Early voting is now 3 weeks in Texas. The ways that you can get registered are now different. And so I think voter education is super, super critical. And there's just some things that people don't know, right? So a lot of people don't know how you can qualify for vote by mail. And a lot of people don't know, where you can get registered. I have people who text me every day about, wanting to get registered and things like that. And, because early voting is now 3 weeks, the deadlines are a little bit different. And so I think that, making sure that your congregation has information on, how to get registered, when is early voting, how they can get information to their closest polling location, signing that pledge to vote, helping them create a plan to vote is going to be super, super critical. Because I think, as I mentioned, with so many things changing, with continued rhetoric that we're seeing around, voter suppression and voter accessibility, it's going to be super critical that, your congregation has a reliable source and trust you all as people who can give them correct information. And so being able to educate voters and give them that material, I think it will be super critical this fall.
All right, Josh.
This time around, service to your country seems to be a little more than just simply voting. We seem to be being tested. Who we are as a nation is being tested. And the election is in 51 days, but we may very well be tested for the next 129. And not until then, really know if we pass the test as a country. But it's not too late. And I want to give some examples of congregations that are really certainly going above and beyond. I know Congregation Emmanuel in Houston checked the registration of everyone in their congregation to make sure that they're registered to vote. Super important to make sure that everybody is still registered. Everybody who believes they're registered is registered. You don't want to show up on election day and find out that something weird happened where you were administratively marked inactive when you weren't, or that you moved, or something weird occurred. So make sure you check it. I know University Presbyterian Church here in Austin has sent applications for ballot by mail to every person in their membership that's over 65. That's a super big deal. Making sure that people who are eligible to vote by mail actually vote by mail takes them out of the line on election day. It's another form of early voting. In fact, in Texas, it's legally called early voting by mail, as opposed to early voting in person. Again, voting early is so critical. It doesn't really matter how you do it as long as you do it early. And so, a big legal fight got mentioned earlier that Harris County is having with the state about sending out applications for ballot by mail. There is no prohibition on private parties doing it. And so, University Presbyterian Church went above and beyond. They paid for the postage. They even hand-delivered some that were necessary to take to people's houses. And then they tracked who did it, and they followed up with people via phone calls to remind them. It was a great get-out-the-vote effort. And that is that whole model is in our publication that I linked to in the chat box on how to vote by mail. Third, I'm aware of a rabbi here in Austin who's taking the need to minister to the needs of his congregation after November 3rd quite seriously. So he decided he's going to be an election judge so he can speak to how and what he saw and how it works. And I believe he's also doing recruitment from within his congregation for other election judges as well. That's another model that is super important for congregations to be involved with. And then lastly, I know a Unitarian who has a full-time job, not just a full-time job, but 2 kids doing online school and a family member that's at high risk for COVID. So she cannot commit a whole 16-hour day to being a judge, but she is going to commit to being a poll monitor and using that as part of civics education for her children. And that is so important to have for the election lawyers to have those eyes and ears out there across those 10,000 polling locations on election day.
I'll add to Josh's list, and then I see Dr. Stein wants in. The one other church that I would highlight, because they spoke at our Dallas version of this event, is Friendship West Baptist Church, who's in a primarily Black neighborhood in Dallas, and wanted to make sure that they had enough election workers. So they've set a goal as a congregation, they're a big church, of recruiting and training 100 election workers to serve their neighborhood and community. So that's certainly another congregation I'd want to lift up for their work. Dr. Stein, you had your hand up. You're muted again.
I just wanted to mention that Texas is one of a handful of states that lets poll workers work split or part-time shifts. What's this mean basically is when you do sign up to be a poll worker, poll clerk, poll judges are the men and women that actually run the entire operation at a location, you can do part-time shifts. And given the demand, I don't want to speak for the clerk or Michael Wynn who runs it, and clearly they would like people to make as much of a time commitment, if not weekly. But remember, we're going to have 16 days of early voting, 8 hours a day. We're talking 100 hours or more, to say nothing about the number of different tasks. If you can speak Chinese, Japanese, any Asian dialect, Spanish, of course, Eastern European languages, language becomes a big impediment for many people, not on the ballot because we have bilingual, we have language ballots, but just in terms of navigating. But you can make requests to work certain days and certain hours in certain locations, and everyone should be encouraged to do that because trust me, 12,000 people is a lot of poll workers, and we hope November 3rd, and of course starting on the 23rd of October through early voting ending, that's a lot of days, and it could be hot, it could be rainy, but don't think that you have to work every day, every hour at a location. You can, poll workers, they're not going to like me saying this, but men and women who want to be poll workers, the supply the demand exceeds the supply, you'll have a little bit more bargaining room. And there are 121 locations for early voting and 751 that are listed on the clerk's website. So you can go in there and say, I'm ready to do check-in, I'm ready to do line maintenance. But those are options that I think people should consider.
I am seeing a question in the chat, and I'm not sure if one of you can answer this. Somebody who applied to vote by mail but changed addresses since they applied. Any advice on how to handle that situation? Or do we need to follow back up later?
If you change addresses, you're legally required to change your registration. And literally, if you move from 1B to 1C, technically those are changes in addresses. Normally, that's not a problem for in-person voting because they're only really trying to determine whether or not you're in the right precinct. But if you want a mail ballot, you must be able, unless you're out of the jurisdiction on election day, the ballot must be sent to the address on the voter registration. So if you've moved from apartment, and half of our population is moving every 2.5 years, you've got to do what Josh and I think Raven said, check your registration now. If there's something wrong with it, address, number, zip code, you've got to get that right. Otherwise, you won't get a mail ballot. And if you do, it will not be counted when it's returned because the address will not match the address on the list.
So Scott, in the chat box and in the Q&A, I went to votetexas.gov, which is the Secretary of State's website, and it is what to do. It's called "Did you change something?" and it's what to do if you've moved, and I assume because it's college that it's in the county, but they also have instructions for what to do if you've changed counties.
Gotten a couple of questions, both in the chat and offline, about mail-in voting. Josh, it seems like you're confident in the system if you do everything early. Is that accurate, or do you have any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, we've been looking into, we actually open records requested from the 30 largest counties, the rejection rates of ballots by mail. And we don't have them all back yet, but we've got about 25 of them back, which is a different issue with the open records law. But we've got a pretty good sample back from, especially involving the 10 largest counties. And it's below 2%, which sounds really scary. But if you think about all the people who are disenfranchised because there aren't enough polling locations, or the lines were too long, or they changed a polling location, that's why it's still super important to do ballot by mail. And let me tell you, we actually looked at the reason they were rejected, so this is super important. 85% in both Bexar and Harris County were rejected because they arrived too late. So it is not some administrative body tossing your ballot out. It's because the mail got it there too late. And this is all pre-COVID. I mean, we're looking 3 years back and for the past 3 election cycles. So if you do it early, I'm pretty confident in it. And even with the mail slowdowns, that's why I'm saying if you apply by the 21st, you'll get it on the first round of mail-out ballots. Don't procrastinate. Fill it out and get it in as soon as you get it, and you should be okay, I think.
I will say this. Texas, I've been studying this for about 20 years. I've worked in Colorado where they have vote by mail and had difficulty getting people to return their ballots in time so they could be counted. Texas is one of a handful of states that's allowed to pre-process mail ballots. That means they can open them, verify, cure, and count, but not release until election night mail ballot totals. That means that the earlier you get your ballot in, the greater the certainty it is on election night, the results from mail ballot will be reported. 2, I've been through the rejected mail ballots from the July primary in virtually all of the metro areas. We are the lowest. Let me be clear on this. There are 3,400 jurisdictions that conduct elections. I've been looking at this pre-COVID and post-COVID. We are remarkably good at handling mail ballots. Admittedly, we were going to go from 8% to probably 30 or 35. That's a 4-fold increase. But I think Josh is absolutely right. The biggest problems are going to be people who fail to properly return their ballot to the right location at the right time. The second will be, don't forget to sign your ballot and put it in the security envelope. That's the second most frequent one. Yep. People fill it out, they do everything, they check it, they have their spouse, their partner go over it, and they forget to sign it. There's nothing you can do about that. And the later you send it, the less opportunity. This county, Harris, will cure those, which means they will look to see if Josh didn't sign it, and they'll call him up. But the bottom line is, get your ballot in when you made your vote. One of the things that we've learned in Colorado, where we did a mass experiment with 500,000 plus voters in El Paso County, is that on the envelope we said, return this when you've completed it. You asked for vote by mail, make it work. That's the most powerful message. We're working with a group called Black Sheep that has a contract with the county to use that messaging to tell people, this isn't some conspiracy. You asked for the ballot, make it work. You return your publisher's sweepstake envelope just as soon as you get it, do your ballot.
And I'll just add to that, we're involved in a lawsuit right now over signature matches with vote by mail, because traditionally the way that it works is if you don't miss the deadline, but or if you don't put it in the right envelope, but your ballot is still not counted, that is generally because there is a signature match issue. So they compare the signature on your vote by mail ballot with the signature on your voter registration application. And if they don't match, they can throw that out. But what happened prior to this court case is they generally did not notify voters that their ballot was not counted until 10 days after the election. And so by suing the state, we just got a ruling back last week that now the county has to contact those voters and give them 8 days to rectify the issue before they just throw their ballot out. And so we're trying to close all of the loops, even if it's just a small one, to ensure that, as many people's ballots are being counted as possible.
Well, I have an eye on the clock, and I don't want Dr. Stein to get in trouble with his grandchildren. I was going to give you all a chance for a closing thought. You have anything before you need to check out on us?
No, I want to thank Josh and Raven. I've worked with Temple Emmanuel, several other congregations. I know the great work they're doing. The one that I think is most impressive is Raven and TOPS and several other groups. Voter registration, particularly among historically underrepresented populations, has not only been spectacular, but the good news is that we've seen this even before the COVID-19. We saw it pre-218, and then the turnout rates in 218, as we all know, were spectacular. So I must say, I know this is not a time to be bullish, and it's not a time to, how should I say, be less vigilant, but my sense is somewhat older than all of you probably put together. I'm most impressed with the seriousness with which people are taking this election. And I won't gander to say how all we're voting, but I'll even say those who don't agree with us. This is going to be a spectacular election. There may be some surprises and there may be some trials and tribulations, but the simple fact of the matter is it won't be for lack of interest and participation.
Well, we certainly thank you for your work on behalf of this work. And we'd sing happy birthday right now, but I've learned that doesn't work very well on Zoom. So tell your wife.
I'm going to go out and see my grandkids. You all have a good week.
Enjoy that. You too. Raven, any closing thoughts from you?
No, I think Dr. Stein covered it well. I think the only thing I will say is that it's going to take all of us. We're not, MOVE as an organization, we can only do so much. The work that's happening at Harris County took a collaborative of dozens and dozens of organizations working together to really kind of increase voter accessibility there. But even if you're just, reminding someone about the voter registration deadline or, asking someone if they need a ride to the polls, all of that is going to have a major impact on our election this fall. And so, you just have to find kind of where you fit into the movement and really own that.
And I know Josh and I have talked about this before. I heard David Plouffe, who knows a thing or two about elections, recently challenged people to make a list of everybody in their life that they want to make sure are registered and voting and start checking off to make sure that they've all confirmed their registrations and then confirm again during early voting that they've actually showed up. So that's a good homework assignment for all of us. Josh, you want to close us out? Any closing thoughts?
Not a lot. I mean, I just keep coming back to Ben Franklin. And he said, after the Constitutional Convention, someone shouted out to him, "What do we got, a republic or a monarchy?" To which he responded, "A republic, if you can keep it." And you can, if you get involved. If you don't get involved, we may not.
Well, that's not the moment of hope I wanted to end on. All right. So, friends,
I think Dr. Stein's right. I mean, I think Dr. Stein's right. I want to be stark, but I'm also encouraged. I think we're going to have a lot of participation. I think people are really. I think we're going to pass the test, and who we are as a nation, and we're not going to give up our institutions and our values.
Well, I appreciate the work the three of you are doing to make sure that we are doing that work. Thank you all for tuning in. My hope is that we leave here today not just taking in information for our own purposes, but that we take the information that we've heard today, go out to our congregations and our networks, and really engage people in this important work. Now is the time. We have a couple of weeks to get this done, starting today, starting tomorrow, Monday morning, if you're listening live. Really appreciate you all tuning in. Remember that Texas Impact is supported by members like you. So check out to see how you and your congregation can become members by going to texasimpact.org/join. For those who are listening live, remember that we do have one final panel beginning at 5:15 featuring the Texas Impact staff, talking about how you can be effective advocates and start thinking towards the January 2021 Texas legislative session. So with that, thank you all for tuning in, and we will look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks, friends.
Thank you.